I am Charlie Munger. I am 99 years old. I am an American investor, businessman, and philanthropist. Famously known as Warren Buffett's longtime partner and the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway today, I am going to speak about what is the hidden difference between getting rich and staying rich. Getting rich is easy. Staying rich is arithmetic. I'm going to start with a number. If you make $1 million by age 40 and lose 50% of it, you don't need skill to recover. You need a 100% return just to get back where you were. Most people never do. That single fact explains why many people get rich and stay poor. People believe getting rich and staying rich are the same problem. They're not. Getting rich is often about opportunity. Staying rich is about behavior. Most people confuse the two. That confusion is expensive. I've watched this play out for decades. People make money once and assume the job is done. It isn't. In many ways, that's when the real work starts. Now start with a belief. Popular belief: if you're smart enough to get rich, you're smart enough to stay rich. That belief is wrong. Here's why. Getting rich often involves concentration, leverage, or timing. Staying rich requires the opposite. The arithmetic changes. Suppose you start with $50,000. You invest aggressively. You earn 15% a year for 20 years. That turns into roughly $820,000. That's impressive. Now suppose you keep behaving the same way after you've accumulated $5 million. One major mistake, one bad cycle, 150% drawdown. Now you're at $2.5 million. The math doesn't care how you got there. From $2.5 million, you now need a 100% gain to get back to $5 million. That usually doesn't happen. This is where people fail. They keep playing the get rich game when they should have switched to the don't get poor game. The rules are different. The incentives are different. The math is different. Most people never make that switch. Let's put numbers on this. If you have $5 million and earn 6% after taxes and inflation, you generate about $300,000 a year without touching principal. That's enough for a very comfortable life. If instead you chase 12% and experience 140% loss, your capital drops to $3 million. Now 6% generates $180,000. Same lifestyle, different risk, lower margin of error. That's not progress. That's fragility. People don't see this because they focus on returns instead of survivability. Another belief people hold is that past success protects them from future mistakes. It doesn't. In fact, it does the opposite. Success increases confidence. Confidence increases risk. Risk increases the chance of ruin. I watched people get rich once and assume they figured it out. They hadn't. They were repeating a behavior that worked in one environment and applying it blindly to another. The market doesn't reward consistency of effort. It rewards consistency of behavior. Those are not the same. Now let's talk about loss, because loss is where staying rich fails. A 10% loss requires an 11% gain to recover. A 30% loss requires a 43% gain. A 50% loss requires a 100% gain. This is not opinion. This is arithmetic. Every large loss permanently raises the bar. Most people underestimate how difficult it is to clear that bar again. I've watched people say, "I'll make it back next cycle." They didn't. Because time works against you as capital shrinks. Now consider time. If you're 30 years old and lose 50%, you might have 35 years to recover. If you're 55 and lose 50%, you probably don't. Same mistake. Different outcome. That's why staying rich is a different problem. Another belief people hold is that diversification alone keeps them safe. It doesn't. Diversification protects against ignorance. It does not protect against bad behavior. I've seen people diversify into dozens of assets and still blow themselves up because they used leverage, chased returns, or ignored costs. If your behavior is bad, Diversification only slows the damage. It doesn't stop it. Now let's talk about the most common destroyer of staying rich, activity. People believe active management keeps them ahead. It doesn't. Every action has a cost. Taxes, fees, timing errors. Suppose you have $3 million invested. If you lose just 1.5% a year to unnecessary activity, that's $45,000 every year. Over 25 years at 7%, that friction alone cost you over $3 million. That's not market risk. That's self-inflicted. Most people never calculate this because the cost is invisible. They see trades, they don't see compounding loss. Another belief is that playing offense keeps wealth growing. It often does the opposite. When you're poor, offense matters. When you're rich, defense dominates. The math flips. If you have $100,000, doubling it changes your life. If you have $10 million, having it ruins your freedom. Same percentage. Completely different consequence. People who stay rich understand this. People who don't keep chasing upside. Now let's talk about leverage. Leverage is the fastest way to get rich. It is also the fastest way to stop being rich. If you use leverage and markets move against you, you don't get to wait. Waiting is the most valuable asset in investing. Leverage removes it. I've watched people with sound, long-term ideas get wiped out because they couldn't survive the short term. That's not intelligence failure. That's structure failure. People say, I'll manage the risk. They don't. The risk manages them. Now let's connect this to behavior. Getting rich rewards. Aggression. Staying rich punishes it. Most people don't adapt. They keep swinging when they should be guarding. They confuse excitement with progress. They confuse activity with intelligence. They confuse risk with courage. The math punishes all three. Here's the quiet truth people don't like hearing. You don't stay rich by being brilliant. You stay rich by being hard to kill. That means fewer decisions, less leverage, lower costs, longer time horizons, more boredom. That combination doesn't feel impressive. It worked. I watched people with far less talent outlast far smarter people because they understood this one difference. Getting rich is about making money. Staying rich is about not losing it. Most people never change the strategy. They pay for that mistake over decades. That's the hidden difference. And once you understand it, the rest becomes obvious. Why the math of staying rich is ruthless. Let's continue with arithmetic, because arithmetic is what ends arguments. The moment you have meaningful capital, math turns against you as you behave the same way you did when you were trying to get rich. Most people never notice the switch. They should. Here's the belief that causes the damage. Popular belief: if a strategy made me rich, it will keep me rich. That belief is wrong. The math changes as the base changes. Let's put numbers on it. Suppose you build your net worth to $5 million by age 45. That's real money. At that point, the question is no longer how do I grow fast? The question is how do I avoid ruin? Now look at returns. At 5%, $5 million produces $250,000 a year. At 7%, it produces $350,000 a year. At 10%, it produces $500,000 a year. People look at that and say, why not aim for 10%? Here's why. To earn 10%, most people take risks that introduce large drawdowns. Let's say you chase higher returns and suffer a 40% loss. Your $5 million drops to $3 million. Now do the math again. At 5%, $3 million produces $150,000 a year. At 7%, it produces $210,000 a year. You permanently lowered your income by chasing upside you didn't need. That's the math people don't do. They focus on returns. They ignore drawdowns. Drawdowns matter more. Now let's talk about recovery, because recovery is where staying rich usually fails. From $5 million to $3 million is a 40% loss. To recover from $3 million back to $5 million, You need a 67% gain. That takes time. At 7%, that recovery takes roughly 8 years. At 10%, it takes about 6 years. It assumes no additional mistakes. Most people don't make just one. Time is not neutral here. Every year spent recovering is a year not compounding. That opportunity cost compounds quietly. Now let's talk about age. If you are 30 and lose 40%, you have decades to recover. If you are 60 and lose 40%, you probably don't. Same loss, different life outcome. That's why staying rich is not about maximizing return. It's about minimizing error. Another belief people hold is that volatility doesn't matter if you don't sell. That belief is half true. Volatility doesn't matter if you have no leverage, you have no forced selling, you have stable income, you have emotional control. Most people have none of those. So volatility matters. Now let's talk about costs, because costs kill staying rich. When you're building wealth, costs slow progress. When you're preserving wealth, costs destroy outcomes. Suppose you have $4 million invested. A 1% annual cost equals $40,000 every year. That doesn't sound dramatic. Over 30 years at 6%, that $40,000 a year costs you over $3.3 million. You didn't lose money in a crash, you lost it quietly. Most people never notice because it doesn't hurt all at once. Now consider taxes. If you churn your portfolio and realize gains annually, you give the government a share every year. That reduces your base. Reducing the base reduces compounding. Let's say you earn 8% before tax, but lose 2% to taxes and turnover. Your real return is 6%. Over 30 years, $3 million at 8% becomes about $30 million. At 6%, it becomes about $17 million. That 2% difference costs you $13 million. That's not a rounding error. That's the cost of unnecessary activity. People don't calculate this because they don't think in decades. Now let's talk about leverage again, because leverage is where staying rich ends badly. Leverage works until it doesn't. If you are leveraged and experience a large drawdown, you don't get to choose when to sell. The market chooses for you. That removes your greatest advantage, time. Time is the only reason compounding works. Leverage steals time. That's why people who stay rich avoid it. They don't care about looking aggressive. They care about surviving. Another belief people hold is that diversification eliminates risk. It doesn't. Diversification spreads risk. It doesn't eliminate behavior. If you panic and sell everything at the wrong time, diversification doesn't help you. If you overtrade everything, diversification doesn't help you. Behavior dominates structure. Now let's talk about the most misunderstood concept in staying rich, enough. Most people don't define it, they just keep going. That's dangerous. If your lifestyle requires $200,000 a year and your capital can safely generate that at low risk, the game is over. Continuing to take large risks after that point is irrational. The math says stop. People don't stop because they confuse growth with success. They chase numbers instead of outcomes. I watched people turn financial independence into permanent anxiety by refusing to adjust behavior. They were rich. They just didn't act like it. Staying rich requires you to lower risk as wealth increases. That feels backward to people. They think success earns them the right to take more risk. In reality, success demands restraint. Now let's summarize the math so far. Losses hurt more than gains help. Drawdowns permanently raise the recovery bar. Costs compound against you. Taxes shrink the base. Leverage removes time as everything. This is why staying rich is harder than getting rich. It's not harder intellectually, it's harder emotionally. You have to stop doing things that worked before. You have to accept lower excitement. You have to accept boredom. Most people can't. That's why the number of people who get rich is much larger than the number who stay rich. The math explains it completely. No mystery, no bad luck, no injustice, just arithmetic. the behaviors that destroy wealth after it's built. Let's be precise about this. Because people like to blame markets. Markets don't usually destroy wealth. Behavior does. The same behaviors that help people get rich are often the ones that wipe them out later. Most people never adjust. Here's the belief that causes the damage. Popular belief: if I avoid obvious mistakes, I'll stay rich. That belief is wrong. Most wealth is destroyed by non-obvious mistakes repeated over time. Let's go through them one by one with numbers. The first behavior is overconfidence. Success makes people trust their judgment too much. They confuse one correct outcome with permanent skill. Suppose someone builds $4 million by concentrating aggressively in a fast-growing business that worked. So they keep concentrating aggressively. One mistake later, a 35% loss takes them to $2.6 million. Now do the recovery math. To get back to $4 million, they need a 54% gain. That doesn't happen easily, especially when confidence is damaged. Overconfidence converts success into fragility. The second behavior is return chasing. People look at what worked recently and assume it will keep working. They say, I can't afford to miss this. That sentence is expensive. Suppose you moved $2 million into a high return strategy because it earned 18% last year. The next year, it loses 30%. Your $2 million becomes $1.4 million. To recover, you need a 43% gain. Most people don't wait for that recovery. They exit near the bottom and lock in the loss. That loss didn't come from bad math. It came from bad timing driven by emotion. The third behavior is excessive activity. People believe activity equals control. It doesn't. Activity increases friction. Let's quantify it. Assume a $3 million portfolio. If you trade enough to lose just 1.5% annually to taxes, fees, and mistakes, that's $45,000 a year. Over 25 years at 6%, that friction costs over $3 million. You didn't lose money because the market failed. You lost it because you couldn't sit still. The fourth behavior is leverage creep. People say they're conservative. Then they add just a little leverage, then a little more. Leverage doesn't announce danger in advance. It waits. If you borrow 30% against a portfolio and the market drops 35%, your equity drops about 50%. That's arithmetic. Now your behavior changes. You stop thinking long term. You start thinking about survival. Leverage turns volatility into panic. That's why people who stay rich avoid it entirely. The fifth behavior is lifestyle expansion. This one looks harmless. It isn't. Suppose your net worth is $5 million and you increase annual spending from $150,000 to $300,000. That extra $150,000 must come from returns. At a safe 5%, you now need $6 million instead of $3 million to support the same margin. You didn't change your income, you changed your risk. Lifestyle inflation quietly forces higher returns. Higher required returns force higher risk. Higher risk increases failure probability. The math is clean. The sixth behavior is ignoring opportunity costs. People say, I can afford this. That's irrelevant. The correct question is, what does this cost me over time? If you pull $200,000 out of a portfolio earning 7% at age 45, that $200,000 would have become about $760,000 by age 65. You didn't spend $200,000. You spent $760,000. Most people never do that math. The seventh behavior is complexity. Complexity feels sophisticated. It usually hides risk. People build portfolios they can't explain. When something goes wrong, they don't know what to fix. They panic. Simple systems fail less often. Complex systems fail in unexpected ways. That matters when the base is large. The eighth behavior is refusing to change the game. This is the most common mistake. People keep playing offense when the correct move is defense. If you have $100,000, doubling it matters. If you have $10 million, having it destroys your freedom. Same percentage. Different consequence. People who stay rich understand this. People who don't keep swinging. They mistake aggression for competence. The ninth behavior is ignoring incentives. Banks make money on loans. Advisors make money on activity. Funds make money on assets under management. They are not paid to reduce your risk. Once you understand that, much advice becomes obvious. People who stay rich ask one question first: who benefits if I follow this? The 10th behavior is emotional decision-making under stress. Stress collapses time horizons. People stop thinking in decades and start thinking in days. That's fatal. The math of long-term success requires long-term behavior. Emotion shortens time. Shortened time destroys compounding. Now step back and look at the pattern. None of these behaviors look reckless individually. Together they destroy wealth. I've watched this cycle repeat endlessly. People blame markets. They blame bad luck. They blame timing. The math says otherwise. Wealth is not fragile by default. People make it fragile. If you want to stay rich, you must behave differently after success. You must reduce risk as capital grows. You must accept lower excitement. You must value boredom. Most people won't. That's why staying rich is rare. The exact rules that keep wealth intact. By the time someone has real money, the rules are no longer complicated. They're just uncomfortable. Staying rich is not about doing more things right. It's about stopping yourself from doing obvious things wrong. Most people refuse to accept that. Let's go through the rules, one by one. With math, Rule 1, eliminate leverage completely. This is not optional. Leverage is the fastest way to turn wealth into anxiety. Suppose you have $5 million and borrow 30% against it. You now control about $7.1 million in assets. If markets drop 35%, your assets fall to about $4.6 million. Your debt does not fall. Your equity drops to about $2.5 million. You lost 50% of your net worth. Now do the recovery math. To go from $2.5 million back to $5 million, you need a 100% gain. That usually doesn't happen. Leverage doesn't just increase returns. It compresses time. It forces decisions when patience is required. That's why people who stay rich don't touch it. Rule 2, reduce decisions as capital grows. More money does not justify more activity. It just increases the cost of mistakes. If you have $100,000 and make a 10% error, you lose $10,000. If you have $10 million and make the same error, you lose $1 million. Same mistake, different damage. So the correct response to wealth is fewer decisions. I wanted to make very few decisions that mattered and then stop. People who stay rich are not busy, they're selective. Rule 3, favor durability over maximum return. Maximum return is irrelevant if it introduces fragility. Suppose you can earn 6% with very low risk, 10% with significant drawdown risk. At $5 million, 6% gives you $300,000 a year. 10% gives you $500,000 a year. People look at that and chase the $500,000. Then they experience a 40% drawdown. Now $5 million becomes $3 million. 6% on $3 million is $180,000. They permanently lowered their income. The pursuit of higher returns made them poorer. That's the math people ignore. Rule 4, keep costs near zero. Costs compound against you. They never stop. If you have $4 million and lose just 1% a year to fees and friction, that's $40,000 annually. Over 30 years at 6%, that single percentage point costs you over $3 million. No market crash required, just patience and negligence. People who stay rich are obsessive about costs because the math demands it. Rule 5, hold assets for long periods. Selling creates 3 problems: taxes, timing risk, reinvestment risk. If you sell an asset and give up 20% in taxes, your next investment must outperform by 25% just to break even. Most don't. That's why frequent selling destroys wealth. People who stay rich don't trade, they own. Rule 6. Define enough and stop this rule is the hardest. If your lifestyle requires $200,000 a year and your capital can safely generate that, the rational move is to stop taking risk. Continuing to chase higher returns after that point is irrational. The upside doesn't change your life. The downside ruins it. Most people ignore this because they enjoy the game. The game doesn't care. Rule 7. Maintain excess liquidity. Liquidity buys time. Time fixes mistakes. If you are fully invested and something goes wrong, you are forced to act. If you have cash, you can wait. Waiting is a weapon. People who stay rich value liquidity more than return. Rule 8. Design life to reduce emotional decisions. Discipline is unreliable. Structure works. I avoided environments where I would feel pressure to act. I avoided constant news. I avoided people who treated investing like entertainment. Emotion shortens time horizons. Short time horizons destroy compounding. Rule 9. Assume you are not exceptional. This rule protects everything else. Markets don't care about your past success. They don't remember it. Assuming you are special is how people justify taking risks they don't need. People who stay rich assume the opposite. They assume they can make mistakes, so they structure their lives to survive them. Rule 10. Boredom is a feature. If your financial life is exciting, something is wrong. Excitement usually means leverage, speculation, or overconfidence. Staying rich feels boring. That's because boredom means nothing is breaking. That's the goal. Now step back and look at these rules. None of them are complex. None of them are clever. They just work. People ignore them because they don't feel impressive. I've watched people violate one or two of these rules and lose everything. I've watched others follow them quietly and never worry again. That's not luck. That's structure plus arithmetic. What actually matters after you've won the game? Once you've built enough wealth, the game changes again. Not financially, psychologically. Most people don't notice this shift. That's why they ruin what they already have. Here's the belief that causes the final round of damage. Popular belief: if you won financially, you should keep pushing. That belief is wrong. The math no longer supports it. Let's start with a simple number. If your capital can safely generate your annual spending without touching principal, you've already won. Anything beyond that point does not meaningfully improve your life, but it can destroy it. Suppose your lifestyle costs $250,000 a year. At a conservative 5%, you need $5 million. Once you have that, additional risk does not buy freedom. It buys volatility. Now look at the downside. If you take unnecessary risk and lose 30%, your $5 million becomes $3.5 million. At 5%, that produces $175,000. You didn't just lose money, you lost margin. Margin is what lets you sleep. Most people don't realize this because they focus on net worth, not resilience. Resilience is what matters at this stage. Another belief people hold is that money solves anxiety. It doesn't. Structure does. I've watched people with tens of millions live in constant fear because their lives were built on fragile assumptions. High spending, illiquid assets, complex portfolios, constant activity. Their net worth was high. Their freedom was low. Freedom comes from simplicity. Now let's talk about time, because time becomes more valuable than money. At this stage, every additional dollar competes with peace of mind. That trade-off is rarely worth it. If you can live well without worrying about markets, news, or forecasts, you've achieved something most people never do. Chasing more after that point usually reintroduces stress. The math supports stopping. People don't stop because they confuse momentum with purpose. They keep playing because they don't know how to quit. That's not ambition. That's habit. Another thing that matters after you've won is reputation. Not public reputation, personal reputation. Can you trust your own judgment? People who blow up late in life often say the same thing. I didn't think this could happen to me. That sentence is expensive. Assuming immunity is how people reintroduce risk they no longer need. Now let's talk about legacy, because this is where arithmetic meets reality. If you leave behind $10 million and your heirs manage it poorly, it won't last. At 5% real returns, that money halves roughly every 14 years. 2 generations later, it's gone. That's not moral failure. That's math. Money without structure disappears. People who understand this simplify, they reduce leverage, they reduce complexity, they reduce temptation, they don't rely on brilliance, they rely on systems. Another belief people hold is that excitement equals meaning. It doesn't. At this stage, excitement usually means risk without reward. Meaning comes from control. Control of time, control of attention, control of exposure. The math of control is simple. Fewer dependencies, lower fixed costs, more optionality. Optionality is what wealth is actually for. Not status, not numbers on a screen. Options. The option to say no, and the option to wait. The option to wait. Most people never reach this point because they never change their behavior. They keep chasing. They keep comparing. They keep reacting. The math punishes all three. Here's the final arithmetic truth. If you avoid large losses, keep costs low, and give time room to work, wealth becomes boring. Boring is success. People who fail late in life don't fail because they didn't know enough. They fail because they forgot what mattered. They forgot that the goal was never the number. The goal was stability. Once you have stability, protecting it becomes the only rational move. Everything else is noise. That's the end of the game. And if you understand the math, you'll know when to stop playing.